Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I am Marissa, the Teen Services Librarian. Tonight's event is being recorded and will be available and able to find on the Princeton Public Library's YouTube page by the end of the week. During tonight's event, we expect all participants to comply with the Princeton Public Library's Code of Conduct and to maintain an atmosphere of respect and fairness. Anyone who is not compliant will be removed. The chat will remain open during the program where you can show support for our Teen Advisory Board members, but we will not be answering questions. Please leave your mics and cameras off during the presentation and make sure you are on speaker view. Before we get started, I wanted to give you a little history behind the event tonight. I Read This Book was created 6 years ago to encourage the teens on the Teen Advisory Board to read for pleasure, but it's had a lasting impact not only on its members, but on the community as well. This program brings together teens, library staff, library board members, library partners, public school teachers and librarians, local booksellers and publishers. No other program has such a far-reaching impact or a diverse guest list. The goal of I Read This Book was not to simply give a book report, but for the Teen Advisory Board members to tell you why they love the books they chose and what it means to them. This year's I Read This Book is particularly special because it happens to fall on the launch of summer reading. We hope you find a good book or two to add to your summer reading list. The extraordinary teens you'll be hearing from tonight have gone above and beyond what I thought was possible during these unprecedented times. The last year has not been easy on anyone, and TAB worked hard to create a virtual space on the TAB Instagram where teens could stay connected with the library. They posted weekly book talks, promoted the library's digital collection, created fun literary surveys and quizzes, created a podcast where they interviewed accomplished authors and recorded themselves reading a chapter a day for elementary and middle school students. These are just a few of the programs they've done over the year and a half. Their endless creativity keeps me on my toes, and their love for the library is a driving force. TAB is more than a volunteer opportunity. I have watched every one of them find their voice and their place in the library community. Every single one of them has truly been an advocate for the library and an ambassador to the teen community. I can't say enough how proud I am of all of them for all the amazing work they have put into TAB this year. And now let's get started. So first up, we have Lily. And just bear with me for one moment as I switch participants.
Hi, I'm Lily, and by far my favorite book that I read over this past year is Truly Devious by Maureen Johnson. This book follows the story of a girl named Stevie Bell who gets accepted into this prestigious school called Ellingham Academy because she is in love with true crime and she is a detective. And she is attempting to solve this decades-old series of murders/kidnappings that happened at the school that have never been solved. And I love this book so much. It's the perfect book to read in a pandemic when you just want to escape. Each person who goes to the school has a really special talent. So Stevie has her talent for observation and her detective skills. One of her friends is an author. One of her other friends is an engineer. So they're all so unique and just cool. And getting to read their conversations and hear their banter just really pulled me into this beautiful world with these fantastic characters. And I felt like I was their friend. And it really kept me company during the pandemic. And the school environment, kids get to pursue their passions there, and there are so many libraries and statues and so many books, and it's clearly written by somebody who really loves mysteries and who really loves like little book nooks and perfect reading spaces. So it's the perfect book for book lovers. And also the mystery is so complex. It unfolds over the course of 3 books, and there's a mystery going on in Stevie's present timeline alongside the mystery that unfolds in the 1930s. So it's really will keep you guessing depressing. It kept me up well into the night, wondering what was going to happen. I even got a little bit scared, but that's mostly because I get scared at most books that I read, so it's not super scary, but I was very invested. And this book, the writing style too, is so marvelous and whimsical. I felt like each sentence, I didn't know where the sentence was going to go because Maureen Johnson's writing style is so inventive. The way she uses words is so clever. And also, the mystery had a letter, a ransom note that happens around the murders that happened in the 1930s, signed by someone named Truly Devious. And the note is very playful, and it's a poem that uses these silly words, and it's very sinister but also playful. And I would say that tone is very well maintained throughout the course of the story because the writing style is marvelous and whimsical and kind of funny, but also very sinister because these murders and kidnappings are happening all around you. And so this book is very atmospheric and it's just delightful. I highly recommend this book if you want a good time and to relate to some characters and really root for them. And also if you want to feel like you're part of this amazing friend group and like you have some company. This book, it's amazing. I really love Truly Devious, and I highly recommend it if you like mysteries or books in general. So thank you.
Hi, I'm Sophie, and I'm presenting The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. The Starless Sea is a beautifully written story of a whimsical person who goes to a whimsical place where their life from that moment on is something readers dream about. The protagonist, Zachary Ezra Rollins, is the son of a psychic. Zachary is not a believer, not really. He's an academic and spends an awful lot of time in his college library. In his library, Zachary finds a book that isn't in the catalog, and he's surprised to say that he hasn't seen it before. As he reads, Zachary recognizes the story because it's his own. As a child, Zachary had some interesting encounters with doors painted on walls. We'd think these to be solid, of course, and in this experience of Zachary's, they were. However, as Zachary reads on, his story continues despite having surpassed his current life. The book tells Zachary that he will find a door that is not solid and should go to a place called the Starless Sea, an endless library home to infinite stories with its own set of rules and time. A terrified Zachary eventually finds his way to a door and an elevator and a lobby and a person, all who take him to this place where time and fate exist as people. I've never read a book like this. This book is a love letter to storytelling, and anyone who grew up reading during recess will find this book to be kin. I've never felt more lost in a setting, and there is yet to be another place where I want to stay as long as I felt in the Starless Sea. Morgenstern crafts a lovable cast of characters and an engaging plot while incorporating intercalary chapters between the main ones. They're from the book Zachary found, titled Sweet Sorrows. They add to the puzzle of the Starless Sea and only make you more drawn to the newness of the place you're reading about. Throughout the novel, you're trying to figure out how everything is connected, which it is, and when you realize how, the resulting conclusions are beautiful. I always say that the worst part about reading is remembering that is in fact what you're doing, that you're not actually reading in the book, and there has never been a place I wanted to be more than the Starless Sea. Next up, we have Olivia.
Hi, I'm Olivia, and I'm presenting on Where the Crawdads Sing. So, Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens is a masterfully written, part romance, part mystery, and part coming-of-age story that is truly impossible to put down. I think I read it in the span of 48 hours. The plot spans two timelines, and in the first, we follow the main character, Kaya Clark, a young, free-spirited girl, as she grows up in a shack down in the marshes of North Carolina in 1952. Kaya's mom walks out when she is very young, and over the years, her older siblings also depart in search of a better life. It is just Kaya and her father for a while, though their strained relationships reaches a breaking point, and he too leaves. Now alone in the marsh with little food and money, Kaya realizes she has to take matters into her own hands if she is going to survive. With nature as her guide, Kaya thrives in the marsh and gains an extensive knowledge of the wildlife that helps her get by. As the years pass by, Kaya remains relatively isolated but her beauty and reputation attract the attention of two young men who pursue her attention in both timelines of the book. The second timeline of the book surrounds the murder of a beloved local, Chase Andrews, and this occurs in 1969. Kaya, who has always been seen as an outsider in her community, is the prime suspect in the case, and as the investigation unfolds, the suspicion around her grows. I absolutely adored this book for its suspenseful and thought-provoking plot, which kept me enthralled until the very end, and its vivid scenic descriptions of the natural world. Where the Crawdads Sing appeals to all audiences, so I strongly recommend you give it a read. Thank you. And next up, we have Kiara.
Hi, so I'm going to be presenting Girl Out of Water. Girl Out of Water is a book by Laura Silverman about a girl named Anise who has lived in Santa Cruz, California her whole life. She loves where she lives and never wants to leave. After high school, she wants to go to college in Santa Cruz. Her plan for the upcoming summer is to hang out at the beach and surf with her friends. But then her aunt gets into a car accident and she's forced to spend her summer in Nebraska taking care of her cousins. On top of all of that, she has to live in the house her runaway mother used to live in. Anise hates leaving Santa Cruz, but through the course of her summer, she gets to know people in Nebraska and learns more about her mom. She sees a new place, and it makes her consider the idea of leaving her Santa Cruz bubble and exploring the rest of the world. I love this book because I love a story that is character driven and focuses on character development, which this book definitely does. You can see how Anise changes throughout the summer as she makes new friends and learns about her mother's background. I also love the message of the book. It's about getting out of your comfort zone and seeing the world and not just staying where you are because it's easy. As someone who's heading off to college soon and going very far away, I found that message to be incredibly relatable and inspirational. Thank you.
Okay, sorry about that. I had a small technical difficulty. Hello, my name is Jinmi, and I will be presenting The Cousins by Karen M. McManus. So I'm going to start off by explaining what the book is about. So every family has secrets, but what happens when those secrets are so dark and twisted that blood is no longer thicker than water? So the book follows Millie, Jonah, and Aubrey's story, who are cousins, but they barely know each other. And on top of that, they have never once met their grandmother. Dating back to before they were born, their grandmother, who is super rich and reclusive and just luxurious, disinherited and banished their parents by mailing them each a letter with a single phrase: "You know what you did." Ever since then, the Story family has been broken apart. So when Millie, Jonah, and Aubrey each receive a letter inviting them to work at their grandmother's private island for the summer, they're surprised, yet intrigued. Their parents make it abundantly clear that saying no is not an option, because this could be their one and only chance to get back into their mother's good graces and possibly reclaim their family fortune. But when the cousins arrive on the island, it's immediately clear that not everything is as it seems, especially their grandmother, and that whatever broke their family apart all those years ago may not be over. So I loved everything about the cousins. I feel like relationships between cousins are not often explored in literature. I feel like it's more often best friends or romantic interests or even siblings, but I feel like cousins are a very interesting dynamic or family dynamic to explore. And I really like how Karen M. McManus wrote them. I think she really fleshed out every single character, because the book follows Millie, Jonah, and Aubrey, as well as Aubrey's mother. And her life when she was a teenager before her and her brothers were disinherited by their grandmother. And so, each character has their own flaws, their own problems that they're dealing with, aside from trying to figure out what happened with their family and why their grandmother disinherited their parents. And so you kind of find yourself relating to them and rooting for all three of them. And you start to understand the events that led up to their grandmother sending her children those letters, essentially banishing them and cutting them off. The entire time I was reading, I kind of felt like Sherlock Holmes. I was like trying to piece together every little bit of evidence and trying to come up with who could it possibly be or why she did it, or, just what led up to the downfall of their family. And there really is just never a dull moment. The story just continues to build the farther you get into it. And really the only mystery left is why you haven't read it yet. So that is all for the cousins. And up next is Samara.
Hi, I'm Samara, and one of my favorite reads from this year is People Kill People. People Kill People is an extremely unique story told not only through the narratives of 6 different teens, but interspliced with poetry. In this book, Ellen Hopkins tackles the heavy subject of gun violence in America. And as the story progresses and more is shared about the teens' various backgrounds, each character is revealed to have the motive to kill and the gun which gives them the means to do it. This exploration of the inner violence within all of us is very skillfully executed, and it was a book that will leave a lasting impression on all who read it. I initially was skeptical to read a book that was around half prose because poetry is not always my favorite medium of storytelling. But I thoroughly enjoyed the narrative voice that shone through and connected all of the poems, along with the diverse stories of the 6 main characters. Overall, I would highly recommend this book to anyone who loves sitting on the edge of their seat, though, as the title suggests, it can be a little dark, so be prepared to tackle serious and timely issues during your read. Thank you, and next up is Ruchira.
Hi, I'm Ruchira, and I will be presenting We Were Liars by E. Lockhart. We Were Liars was one of my favorite reads of all time and one that truly left me in shock for days. The novel follows the story of a young girl named Cadence and the rest of the Sinclair family, headed by her wealthy grandfather, Harris Sinclair. Every summer, the Sinclair family visits Beechwood Island, owned by Harris, and while Harris's daughters become entangled in fights over wealth and privilege, Cadence, her cousins Marin and Johnny, and her friend Gat all enjoy summer together at the Sinclair estate. At the age of 15, Cadence suffers a severe head injury that not only causes memory loss, but also takes a toll on her mental health as well as her relationship with her cousins. Reflecting on her time spent on the island over previous years, Cadence begins to recall secrets and events leading up to her head injury, followed by one of the biggest plot twists of all time. Lockhart crafts a compelling story that brilliantly intertwines themes of family, friendship, mental health, and privilege. And what I love most about this book is that I felt entirely as confused as Cadence while reading, and it felt as though we were unraveling the plot together. And at no point in this story will you be able to guess what happens next, and the unpredictability of the plot is what stands out in the novel. Rightfully categorized as a psychological thriller and a mystery, We Were Liars will leave you shocked, confused, amazed, and definitely with some trust issues. Thank you. And next is Emily.
Hi, so my name is Emily, and one of my favorite books I read this year had to have been The Secret History by Donna Tartt. And so this story focuses around a group of rich students at an elite college in Vermont who study Greek with their eccentric professor. And the main character is Richard, who is a lower class transfer student from California who winds up joining the group. And as the book continues, the class and the Greek group become more isolated from the rest of the school, and under their teacher Julian's direction, they start to engage in more and more of the things they read about in their classic stories, like Bacchic rites, which are chaotic and frenzied rituals for the Greek god Dionysus. And without spoiling too much, these progressively more and more dangerous rites lead to murder. So that's just a little bit of to get you interested in the story. The reason I picked up this book was because my friend who also loves classics, she really, really loved this book, and that was enough to get me to read it. But I also got really interested in it because I was taking mythology class this year. And so in that class, I was reading some of the exact same stories that the characters in the book were discussing, which just made a really interesting connection and made me feel like I really understood the story better. But if you're someone who's already into mythology or wants to learn more about it, this is a great book for you. And even if you're not, I really highly recommend it because the writing is so intricate and so beautiful. And it has so many different things, like almost everyone will find something they like. There's lots of dark academia, murder mystery, and thriller elements that Donna Tartt manages to seamlessly weave together, pull you in while reading and keep you on your toes the entire time. And she also manages to create characters that are really flawed, but still really engaging. And by this, once I got a few chapters in, I just could not stop reading because I needed to know what was going to happen next. And it kept me guessing until the very end. And anyway, I strongly hope you give it a chance. And next up is Elizabeth.
Hi, so I'm Elizabeth. And I chose the Best American Non-Required Reading, the 2018 edition, as my book this year, which I thought was very fitting for this event, given we have to choose a book that we read that wasn't on the school reading list, and this is non-required reading. And so thankfully, I've had a lot more time to read this year, which has been a bright spot in an otherwise dark year. But it gave me the wonderful problem of not being able to choose my favorite book to present tonight. So I chose this book after much deliberation, but the Best American Non-Required Reading, the 2018 version by Shayla Hetty, is the one I chose because I felt it opened my eyes more than any other book I've read this year, and I'll explain why. So every story, article, and piece of writing in this collection is chosen by a group of 15 high school students from the Bay Area in California. So they are the editors. Everything in this book comes from them. And the book does have an adult guest editor, Shayla Hetty. But ultimately, those 15 teenagers chose every single piece that went into this collection. And as a result, this book felt true in a way that many books geared towards teens don't. This isn't a collection of writing that an adult thinks a teen might like to read. It's a collection of writing that teens themselves know they'll like to read because they were chosen by teens and they put it together. And these 15 teens meet on Tuesdays from 6 to 8 p.m. to choose these stories, which reminds me a lot of another group of high schoolers who meet every Tuesday to discuss their books they're reading. But nothing in this book is dumbed down, as I find anthologies not geared towards adults often are. These are stories from the New Yorker, articles from the Atlantic, and poems from McSweeney's. I had to read many of the stories twice, sometimes even 3 times, to fully take in their meaning. And this really is a book by teens for teens, and you can feel that on every single page. The stories aren't about being a teen, but rather manage to capture the world around us in a unique, decidedly new age teenage light. These are articles and stories about climate change, about eating disorders, about racism, about immigration and sexual assault, and aliens, and the largest shrimp cocktail in the world. And while I've talked a lot about teenagers in reference to this book, I truly think that it is a book that teens and adults alike should read. These stories and articles are important and pressing, regardless of how old you are. So if I had to sum up this book in one word, it would definitely be eccentric. I'm a big fan of the Best American Short Stories and Best American Essays series. And while this book is in the same vein as those series, it's more eccentric, more eclectic, and more idiosyncratic than anything you'll find in those books. The pieces in this book don't box themselves into one category. There are cartoons, there are poems, there are essays, there are short stories, there are interviews all mixed in together. And so overall, it makes for a fascinating, unputdownable read. If it were up to me, everybody would have to read this book, but then it would be required reading, which goes against the whole point of the book. So instead, I'll just highly, highly, highly recommend this book to everyone here because I can guarantee you will not regret it. And next up is Molly.
Okay, hey everyone, my name is Molly and I will be presenting on Criers War by Nina Varela. So Criers War really takes on these classic themes of dystopia, one of like a human run world overturned by something other, think like the Matrix or the Maze Runner, and that of a romance story, and really combines them together into a novel that really elegantly follows the main character, Isla, through her quest to avenge her family. Isla is a human in a world of the ruling autonomy, a race of autonomons powered by a specific stoned mine from a mountain and it's called Heartstone, and a set of steampunk-esque coding called pillars to give them consciousness. The Heartstone has these magic properties that allows the autonomy to be essentially human, and the pillars are split into 3 human emotions and 3 machine emotions, like logic. So Isla is the servant to the autonomy king of this region, and the story really follows her and the king's autonomy daughter, Lady Crier, an autonoma who can mysteriously feel passion, something that the other autonoma cannot. And as they find themselves in like the opposing ends of the battlefield, they eventually find that they're the only 2 people that they can really trust. So I would totally recommend this book. It's one of my favorite books that I've ever read, but I would really recommend it for people who love dystopia, science fiction, and really beautifully written prose, and a real slow burn romance. It doesn't resolve itself within the first book. There are 2 books in this duology, and it takes till the real end of the second book to fully resolve. So I know I really loved Criers War because Nina Varela created an elegantly established world without really resorting to info dumping in the beginning chapters. And then it really sucked me in as a reader until I couldn't put the book down until I finished it. I think I read it in a day. So I also really loved this book because one of the main parts of it is that it depicts a queer romance as the main romantic focus, which I don't really see in a lot of other books. And if it is written into another book, a lot of the times it becomes tokenized instead of more natural, which Varela wrote this romance as being supernatural, not forced at all. It was really lovely to see in a book. So that really made it stand out to me, but I would completely recommend Criers War to everyone. I hope you all check it out. And next up is Jonathan.
I love books because how they transformed my outlook on the world by shedding lights on new perspectives. Recently, I read Factfulness by Hans Rosling, a Swedish physician, professor of public health at the Karolinska Institute, and the founder of the Gapminder Foundation. Rosling opens Factfulness with a quiz about the world, testing the reader's preconceived notions and knowledge of global poverty, human life expectancy, and global population demographics. Like many readers, I answered the quiz quite confidently, using what I had learned in school and from global news. The global life expectancy is around 60 years old, and that black rhinos and giant pandas are still endangered species today. But most of my answers were wrong. The average global life expectancy is in fact 70 years, and neither the black rhino nor the panda are endangered today like they were in 1996. Rosling gave the same survey to all his audience members around the world and found that chimpanzees do better on it than humans because they answer it randomly. Rosling uses a short quiz to prove that most people have a very negative outlook on the world, despite the fact that our world is improving. Rosling introduces factfulness as a way to fight global ignorance. Throughout the book, Rosling explains factfulness using his experiences as a Swedish professor and from being a doctor doing research in the Democratic Republic of Congo and other countries. He applies his philosophy to explain that global childhood poverty is decreasing and that more girls are being educated all around the world. Factfulness is one of my favorite books because of its practicality. Recently, I've been extremely stressed by the news covering the pandemic and our American political drama. Rosling taught me that CNN, Fox, the Wall Street Journal, NBC, New York Times all want my attention. They get money from amplifying America's political extreme minority rather than covering a mom and her 3 kids going to school and cooking pasta for dinner. They cover Donald Trump's latest tweets. Rosling teaches to expect bad news and to ignore it, and to ignore the flashy headlines, because the news does not cover the true reality. Factfulness saved my mental health because it provided me with a new optimistic lens to approach the world. I recommend Factfulness to anyone who loves to think outside the box or is pessimistic about today's world, because Rosling's work will turn you into an optimist. Next up is Isabella.
Hi, I'm Isabel, and today I'm going to present The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. And I'll admit that I was at first hesitant to read this book because in the novel, the aged and retired Hollywood actress Evelyn Hugo asks Monique Grant, a newbie reporter, to write her biography. Hugo has been sheltered, and she's sheltered her relationship and kind of her story from the public for her entire life, and thus the prospect of her finally telling the story behind her 7 marriages is groundbreaking to all who have watched Hugo's films. And prior to reading the book, I feared that a novel solely based on a woman's past relationships with men might be laced in superficiality, but I was extremely wrong. A few chapters into The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, I was completely transfixed. The mystery of why Hugo would choose a new reporter like Monique Grant to tell her story bewildered me and kept me on my toes, and I quickly realized that Grant and Hugo's paths must have crossed somewhere during Hugo's long history. I craved to know what really lay beneath the veneer of Hugo's perfectly manufactured Hollywood status. The way in which Hugo tells her story to the young reporter makes it nearly impossible to put the novel down. Her capacity for storytelling is incredible. She offers just enough to keep us satisfied, but leaves important pieces of her history untold, so that we really have no choice but to read on to the next chapter and the next and the next and the next. And And the novel especially surprised me in its nuanced incorporation of contemporary problems such as heteronormativity, homosexuality, racism, class strife, immigration, and assimilation. Hugo's life as a celebrity was not at all how the media depicted it to be. And in fact, out of all of the novels I've ever read, Evelyn Hugo is probably one of the most dynamically layered characters I've ever come across. Just when you think she might fall into one stereotype, she surprises you and does something completely unexpected but incredible. So, all in all, The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo is a brilliantly written novel, and I thoroughly recommend it as your next read. Next up is Emma.
Hi, my name is Emma. I will be presenting A Visit from the Goon Squad by Jennifer Egan. A Visit from the Goon Squad by Jennifer Egan is a collection of 13 interconnected short stories detailing the trials and tribulations of various people connected to a record company executive named Benny Salazar and his assistant Sasha. It's the winner of the 2011 Pulitzer Prize, and it covers everything from kleptomania to drug use to mortality to family connections. The stories are wild and often outlandish, but everyone strikes a relatable note about an aspect of human existence with powerful narration and plausibly strange scenarios. The stories make you think about the connection of time and memory as you watch the characters bounce back and forth from young to old lives. Both the teenage years of Benny's band and from the teenage years of Benny's band to his deathbed and Sasha's journey through her life, you grow to both love and hate all of the characters. You ponder connections and relationships as you see what happens to the people that once knew Benny and Sasha. And the lives of these people, though nothing like mine, resonated with me on a deeper level than anything I've ever read. I highly recommend this book to anyone who's willing to brave it. Up next is Alexander.
Hello, so I'm presenting A Tale for the Time Being by Ruth Ozeki. I think the book itself, it was a very moving dual narrative that I found to be very inspirational in like many different ways. I really enjoyed the way that we were reading through another reader's eyes, although it did feel a little strange at points, especially because she was reading another character's diary, which itself was the story, and it was interesting seeing how those two stories intertwined. So the narrator, Ruth, which I assume is named after the author Ruth Ozeki, is reading a washed-up diary written by a Japanese girl, Nao, and Nao details her struggles with moving from California back to Japan and the cultural disparity and changes, and even being bullied for that, for being different. And it was really interesting to see how the character who was reading Nao's diary, Ruth, react to her heartfelt stories about a wide variety of topics. Though one thing that I did feel was odd was how Nao's diary felt like it was almost written for someone else, which was actually really interesting because it added to the mystery of the story and how it got washed up on the beach in the first place. It experiments a tiny bit with magical realism, but overall it's a grounded story that intertwines two narratives about two different people's struggles in two completely separate worlds. Overall, it was a wonderful book that explored the idea of timelessness of writing in a very interesting way. I would very highly recommend it. Up next is Shayla.
Okay, hi everybody. Today I'll be talking about one of my favorite YA novels called They Both Die at the End by Adam Silvera. It's safe to say that this book is an emotional roller coaster that constantly had me at the edge of my feet. And as you can tell from the title, this is a pretty morbid book that features a lot of discussion about death, relationships, and grief. However, I wouldn't be discouraged from reading it just yet because of the title. In this futuristic novel, death is forecasted in advance by an organization called Deathcast, which gives people 24 hours notice of their death, or what's called their end day. Deathcast does not inform their callers of the specificities of their death, so the anticipation is all that remains with them. It's basically a waiting game from here on out. And the two main protagonists of the novel, Mateo and Rufus, two teenage boys, unfortunately receive a call from Deathcast on the same day. They meet through an online app of fellow individuals who are also experiencing their end day. And through this unorthodox greeting, the two end up confiding in one another in their last 24 hours. And through this relatively short period of time, the pair learns so much about one another, and Silvera writes the dialogue of the novel to be so extremely heartwarming to read. The book also explores relationships that identify under the LGBTQ plus community, which I feel like is extremely relevant for Pride Month. And the book also follows multiple perspectives, meaning each chapter is narrated by either Mateo, Rufus, or secondary characters to carry out the storyline of the novel. Again, I highly recommend checking out this book, but my only word of advice before you read it is to prepare yourself for some waterworks. Thank you, and next up is Ariel.
Hi, my name is Ariel, and I'll be presenting the Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. So, like Emily said before, she was in a mythology class, and I was actually in her same mythology class, and that got me really into looking at different mythological people from like Greek mythology. And so, the Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller is a complex story that travels through the life of a young exiled prince named Patroclus. The story is adapted from the Iliad by Homer. However, instead of just emphasizing the achievements of Achilles in war by focusing on his seal and his goddess mother Thetis, it dives deeper into both Patroclus and Achilles' past to show how each became the great men they were remembered for. The book starts with Patroclus being exiled from his father's kingdom after he accidentally kills the son of his father's noble guests. With an already built-up resentment towards his son, Patroclus was banished to the kingdom of Pythia, where he meets the king Peleus and his son Achilles. Patroclus was fascinated by Achilles, and they soon became friends. Achilles grew fond of Patroclus and made him his right-hand man, until they eventually fell in love. As a demigod destined for greatness, Achilles and Patroclus spent 2 years training with the infamous centaur Chiron, all up until Achilles and Patroclus were sent as soldiers in the Trojan War. The book focuses on the first 10 years of the war, since a prophecy exists foreseeing Achilles' death after killing Hector. Achilles avoids this for as long as possible until he is dishonored by his commanding officer Agamemnon, and then Achilles vows to abstain from fighting, which takes a huge toll on the Greeks. In an effort to help, Patroclus dresses in Achilles' armor and leads the Greeks in battle. However, he is sadly killed by Hector, who believed he was Achilles. And then upon hearing his death, Achilles is outraged and then seals his fate by killing Hector. So I absolutely loved reading this book because normally stories are told from the hero's point of view. However, everything is told from Patroclus' point of view. Since the story is not commonly or just well known in general, it's interesting to see how his life intersects with so many famous figures to give him more prominence. Even though I had already read Achilles' story, I still found myself perplexed and enthralled by the way Madeline Miller describes his actions. I highly recommend this book because I believe Madeline Miller's twist on a brutal story is filled with life and engages readers in an unexpected way. And next is Layla.
Hi, I'm Layla, and I'm going to be talking about All the Light We Cannot See by Anthony Doerr. All the Light We Cannot See is one of my favorite books. It's captivating, heart-wrenching, and beautifully written. It's set in France and Germany during World War II, and it follows two perspectives trapped on opposite sides of the war. Marie-Laure, a young blind girl living in Paris, and Werner, a boy forced to join the Nazis. Marie-Laure grows up fascinated with marine biology. Her father, a locksmith at the Museum of Natural History, builds her a wooden model of the city so that she's able to navigate on her own. This model is similar to the puzzle boxes in which he wraps Marie-Laure's gift each year on her birthday. However, secretly inside of this wooden model, he's hiding something far more valuable. Werner, on the other hand, grows up in an orphanage with his younger sister. He's an extremely gifted kid with a knack for radio technology and a dream of becoming a scientist. When presented with a choice between working in the coal mines or enrolling in a Nazi training school, he chooses the latter in hopes of still being able to pursue science. He finds himself thrown into the horrors of war, serving on the front lines at the age of 16. As the book progresses, the two perspectives begin to intertwine more and more until they finally intersect at the most crucial point. I really can't say more without spoiling it, but All the Light We Cannot See does a wonderful job of exploring how people can come together on common ground even as strangers on opposite sides of a war. I seriously could not put this book down. I found even rereading it was just as captivating as it was the first time through. One of my favorite aspects of the book is the imagery in chapters narrated by Marie Laure. The author manages to describe scenes in the most beautiful way without ever mentioning their visual appearance. I cannot recommend All the Light We Cannot See enough. It's definitely one of my favorite books of all time. And next up is Gavin.
Hi, I'm going to be presenting for Gavin tonight. Okay, so he says, Another Brooklyn is a wonderful examination of four young and naive girls exposed to the dangers and complexities of society. Jacqueline Woodson touches on themes of displacement and identity through the adventures of four friends residing in downtown Brooklyn. The uncensored and truthful language covers many of the imperfections present in the modern world, specifically the mistreatment and abuse of young women. The language and structure of the novel are extremely unique, following a poetic and verse organization, making this an interesting read. The plenitude of symbols and vivid imagery contributes to the enticing experience. And that is what Gavin wrote about Another Brooklyn. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Peter, and the book that I'm presenting today is The New Map by Daniel Yergin. In my opinion, The New Map by Daniel Yergin is a must-read. Throughout this book, Yergin manages to keep the reader engaged through using the use of anecdotes and explanations of real events. While I've never personally been a fan of nonfiction books, after picking up this book, I couldn't put it down. The New Map explains how energy shapes geopolitics around the world. This book comprehensively covers the effect of oil and gas on geopolitics in America, Russia, China, and the Middle East. Additionally, it analyzes the effect of oil and gas on our climate and explains what needs to be done, as well as what is currently being done, in order to transition us from a society focused on fossil fuels to a society based off of renewables. I would recommend this book to anyone interested in learning more about geopolitics or just looking for a solid nonfiction read. I'm recommend it for everyone. I'm excited to hear what you guys think of it. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, my name's Matali. My favorite book I read this past year was The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexander Dumas. This exciting novel follows the story of Edmond Dantes, a young charismatic sailor whose only plans in life are to be the captain of his friend's ship and marry the love of his life, Mercedes, and live happily ever after in a small, quaint seaside town. However, jealousy consumes his enemies who envy Dante's perfect life. One wants his success and the other his love. It's the ultimate story of revenge. I love this book because of Dumas' masterful plot twists and complex characters. There is always a new event waiting to spring up and surprise you. And this book is perfect for any reader, and I would definitely recommend picking it up from the library if you're up for an adventure.
Hello, I'm Ryan, and the book that I chose was Slaughterhouse-Five or The Children's Crusade by Kurt Vonnegut. And the novel is a story which has been relevant for all time. It's a story about war. However, it's more a story about after war, what we see and don't see out of people. And why I enjoy this book is partly because it's confusing, which is confusing in and of itself when one thinks about it. But there's a certain beauty in attempting to observe the mind of a person whose extreme mental stress we cannot even begin to imagine. We see the story of the main character, Billy Pilgrim, progress from a young man going to war on the Western Front of World War II, who is then captured as part of the Battle of the Bulge and becomes a prisoner of war by the Germans, and then witnesses the horrors of being a POW, and then witnesses one of the worst atrocities of the war on the Western Front, which was the firebombing of this German city of Dresden, where Billy is kept safe in a slaughterhouse nicknamed Slaughterhouse-Five. And then we watch as Billy returns home to the US, becomes an optometrist in a small town in upstate New York, marries a woman who he doesn't love, and slowly suffers the effects of his time at war through PTSD, and potentially, and more than likely, envisions a race of aliens called the Tralfamadorians, who bring him to their own planet and make him the center attraction of their human zoo, where they collect humans and put them on all display. And Billy finds this quite fascinating because he finds himself to be an unremarkable person, even though he is just served in as a part of the greatest generation in World War II. And all of this is told out of order to sort of get to that like crux of the novel being the firebombing of Dresden, which places his mental state in, which is designed to put his mental state in a bit of question as to why he is thinking all these things and why his mind is creating all this imagery to relieve him of trauma. And then I also find it interesting because the first and very last chapters are not told by the point of view of Billy Pilgrim. They're actually told by the point of view of the author himself, Kurt Vonnegut, who wrote about his time, who says that this was actually supposed to be a representation of his time at war and how he was affected, and why, and that he chose to write the novel because he knew that himself and others were going through this. And it is ultimately a story inside the mind of trauma, and it is a story about why we should think about those who serve and how we should treat them after they come home. Thank you. And up next is...
So I read The Second Sex by Simone de Beauvoir, and this was the edition translated by Constance Board and Sheila Malovany Chevalier. And I was introduced to this book in a bit of a roundabout way. My AP World History class was spending a day analyzing important writings from the Age of Revolution. And one of the documents that I found was from the French Revolution, a piece called The Declaration of the Rights of Woman and the Female Citizen by Olympe de Gouges. After reading this document, I looked for other works that this declaration had inspired, and among those works was The Second Sex by Simone de Beauvoir. So I decided to read it, and I must admit, at more than 750 pages of philosophical content and poetic phrasing, this book was dense and at times a little bit difficult to get through. Beauvoir's love of semicolons can get a little bit tiring, to be honest. But I found that once I got used to the writing style, I was enjoying myself and thinking critically about the still very relevant topic of equality, or rather the lack of it. The full book is divided into 2 volumes. Facts and Myths, where Beauvoir goes over the biological, historical, and mythical aspects of the oppression of women, and Lived Experience, where there's a section dedicated to different periods in a woman's life and how they impact her. The version of the book that I read touted itself as the first complete and unabridged version, translated by women for the women, who had included countless footnotes and lengthy prose that were cut out in other translations. And I found that these footnotes and the authentic flow of the language led to a more complete understanding of Beauvoir's original meaning and allowed me as the reader to form my own opinions about her work. I was able to take her ideas, shift them and apply them to our current time and my own perception of the world, which I think is really important. What's also important to remember is when reading is that the context and the time period in which this book was written, which was 1949. So I did not agree with everything written in this book, and reading it doesn't mean that you have to. The scientific explanations written need to be considered with the medical information that Beauvoir would have had available to her at the time. But whatever current thinking might be, it is irrefutable that Beauvoir was a trailblazer and an inspiration to the movement of feminism and the many women that came after her, including me. Her ideas are still impactful to this day. This book forces you to think, to consider our reality and the reasons why the world has come to be like this. I hope that you read even just one chapter of this book and find it worth your while as I have. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Chiara, and I'm going to be talking about The Veins of the Ocean by Patricia Engel. So this novel really explores the trauma that can come with immigration and the fracturing of families. So the story basically followed Reina Castillo, whose brother is serving a death sentence for a crime which she partly kind of blames herself for. And I found her guilt to be one of the most interesting parts of the novel because her guilt really stemmed from her whole family and their past, not only her brother's crime. And even after her brother's death, when she gets to meet Nesto, which is a Cuban immigrant who she forms a friendship with, she still carries a lot of the guilt and the trauma. So she doesn't really feel that she deserves to be happy in this friendship. And the novel really demonstrated how people can adapt to the good and bad in life through Reina's journey. And I also thought that the relationship between Nesto and Reina was really interesting because it not only showed the differences between their heritages, but it also showed a lot of commonalities in their struggle with immigration and how this kind of shared struggle between them let them come together and find comfort in one another and also in nature. So if you're looking for a novel that really portrays the authentic experiences of immigrants and follows flawed yet very strong characters, then you will definitely love The Veins of the Ocean. And next up is Leanne.
Hi, I'm Leanne, and my book is Nimona by Noelle Stevenson. Nimona tells the story of Nimona, an ambitious young shapeshifter, and Ballister Blackheart, a notorious villain, who team up to take down the corrupt institution of heroes in their kingdom. It's a graphic novel, so it's a fairly quick read, but it tells a beautiful story that leaves you asking questions about morality and what exactly is the difference between a hero and a villain. This is actually the second graphic novel I've presented for I read this book, and they've been my favorite books to present because I feel like they're far too often overlooked when people talk about literature, but I've actually found them to be some of the most impactful stories I've read. The illustrations are beautiful, and one of my favorite things about the whole book is that Noelle Stevenson doesn't quite do the classic cartoon thing where characters look exactly the same throughout the whole book. They do each have a signature outfit, but there are subtle shifts that I didn't even notice on the first read, and Nimona's character development is represented by changes in her hair and clothing, which I found super interesting. Every character is nuanced and interesting and clever. The climax had me in shock, and there's even an enemies to lovers subplot that's honestly one of my favorite examples of the trope I've seen in media. This is one of those books that I recommend to everyone, no matter who they are or what they like, and now I'm recommending it to you, so I hope you check it out. Thank you.
Thank you again for joining us for this very special I Read This Book. The recorded video of tonight will be uploaded to the Princeton Public Library's YouTube page by the end of the week. Have a wonderful evening.